Hi and welcome to Young Authors Academy. Today I'm talking about making mistakes. And the reason I'm talking about that is I made a boo-boo this week. So for those of you who subscribe to my newsletter or are on the Facebook page and got on there quickly, you would have noticed that I made a mistake in my author interview for the week. What I did was very foolishly, I put Melissa as my author and it was actually Michelle. How embarrassing is that? And even more embarrassing, I didn't even realize until Michelle emailed me and said very politely that I'd put the wrong name in the blog interview. And this had also already gone out in the weekly newsletter, so everyone on my list received that with the error in it. So the reason I'm talking about this is because, well, number one, it's really easy to make mistakes as writers, and we all do it, even seasoned professionals, it would seem. The reason I made this mistake was last week I had a Melissa, and I kept checking my emails and my interview with Michelle, and I just had it on my brain, Melissa, and I kept reading it as that, even though it said something completely different. So our brains are really weird things. So there's a couple of things I want to talk to you about in relation to that today. And the first is that our brains do play these tricks on us. So you might have written your story and you read it back, and you read it back exactly how you think you wrote it sometimes. And in that way you may not pick up mistakes. So there are a few tricks you can do to get over this problem. One is to print it out and read it in a different setting, like not on the computer, read it on paper. So then you might pick up those mistakes. Or you could read it out loud. Sometimes you'll pick up a mistake that way that you can't see by reading it, because your brain's programmed to think the way you thought you wrote it. And the third way is that you can get someone else to read your work. And this is something really important, and it's probably something I should have done before I sent out that author interview. So there are ideas on avoiding mistakes or picking them up. The other thing I want to talk to you about is, what do you do if you make these kind of mistakes? It's pretty embarrassing, really, isn't it? Like, I was embarrassed to get that email from poor Michelle, and I'm sure she found it hard to have to tell me that, hey, you've put my wrong name in here. But there are things that you can do. So the first thing is to admit when you are wrong and have made a mistake. So first of all, straight away I emailed her back and said, I'm so sorry. And I said, oh, I had Melissa on the brain from last week. You know, make it light. Don't make a big deal out of it, and say, I'm correcting that right now. So that brings me to my second point. So once you've admitted you made a mistake, the next thing is to fix it, obviously. Don't expect someone else to fix it for you. If you made the mistake, it's your responsibility to fix it up. So the second step is, I ran onto that blog post and I fixed up her name, and yeah, it was all good, and I let her know. And I also had to let all my wonderful subscribers know that I made a mistake. Again, a little embarrassing, but had to be done. So I sent out my little message to everybody to correct the mistake and say I'm really sorry, and talk a little bit about mistakes. It was a good opportunity to discuss it. So the last thing is to learn from your mistakes. So obviously I made a silly mistake here, but it's quite an embarrassing one as well, and it's one I don't want to make again. So what can I do to fix that? Well, like I said earlier, I should get someone else to have a quick read over my work. That's one way of fixing this particular mistake. So treat it as a learning experience. We all make mistakes. It doesn't matter, as long as you fix it up and do what you can to fix up what you've done and learn from it. What could I do differently to prevent that from happening next time? One last little thing I want to talk about with that one is, we can get so worried about making mistakes. So now I'm going to be a bit nervous on my next week and double check and triple check and all that kind of thing. But don't let it detract from your writing. So when we're first writing our first draft, we can get stuck on, oh, is that right? Have I put the right information in there? Is that the correct grammar? Have I spelt that word right? Should I write that sentence a different way? Well, that's the point where I say, don't worry about mistakes. This is your first draft, and if you get caught up on mistakes, it's not going to be as good coming from your imagination if you're worrying about that. So get your first draft down and know that you're going to fix up all those kind of mistakes later. So I thought I'd leave you with one more embarrassing story, since I'm confessing all this to you today. And that is a big mistake I made with my publisher with one of the books that I was doing. So when I was writing my Jake in Space series, I had to, before I started writing the books, I had to send in my synopsis, which is a story summary for each of the books. So I wrote all those up and I sent them through, and they were approved by the publisher, and then I went about writing the books for each one. So one of these books is called Saving Saturn. So when I was getting to it, so I wrote one book at a time. When I got to Saving Saturn, I was writing it and I'm like, oh, I was changing things around, and I got to a point where Jake and his friends, they didn't end up even going to Saturn in this story as I was writing it, because even though I've done my summary, that's kind of a loose guide for me to follow. And I thought, oh no, I don't want them to go there. I'm not going to have them go to Saturn. They went somewhere else. Anyway, so that was all good, and I sent it in for my editor to look at. And in the meantime, my publisher very excitedly sent me through my cover for that book and the title. And guess what? It said Saving Saturn. That's what the title was called. And there was a big picture on the front of Jake going with his friends to Saturn. I was like, oh no, I have just not even put Saturn in my book. And it's going to be called Saving Saturn. This is a disaster. And I was like, well, I could have gone to them and said, oh no, you're going to have to change the title, you're going to have to change the picture. He doesn't go to Saturn in it, because obviously my editor hadn't looked at the manuscript yet. They got their designers doing the covers first. And I could have done that, but it wouldn't have been the right thing to do, because in my story outlines, my synopses, I had said that they would be going to Saturn. And of course the designers had just gone off this, which is the correct thing for them to do. So it was my responsibility. So I had to put on my embarrassment hat, get over that, take that hat off, and send an email to my editor and say, look, I've made a mistake. I haven't actually put that they've gone into Saturn. So that's number one. I admitted my mistake, and I need to fix the mistake. So I said, I'm going to go back and rewrite it so that they are going to Saturn. So I had to sit down and spend a lot of time, maybe a week, fixing all that up so that they are going to Saturn in the end. And if you admit to things, people are fine about it. Honestly, Michelle was fine. She had a bit of a laugh, and I had a bit of a laugh in the end. As long as you admit your mistake and fix it up and know that you can learn something from this. I learned a good lesson with my book there to not change things without checking with the publisher first. And you'll be fine and learn something from it. Alright, so I hope there's some helpful tips there for you since I've shared my embarrassing stories with you today. If you want to follow along, find out more from Young Authors Academy, you can sign up to this YouTube channel and subscribe to that and get your weekly information and tips and advice. And you can also go to the website at youngauthors.academy.com. You can follow the Facebook page, Twitter, Instagram, and you can even sign up for my newsletter, and hopefully there won't be any more mistakes in it. Okay, thanks for listening. Bye.